As of the 2010 census, more than 1.1 million people, almost 1 in 7 New Yorkers, identified as Asian. Asians make up the city's fastest growing group of ethnic communities, which is one reason they're also moving into the city's public housing. Currently, some 20,000 live in NYCHA housing, about 5% of the total population there. But according to a new report, speakers of Mandarin and Urdu, Korean and Bengali are having trouble making themselves heard by NYCHA authorities.
Well, the report has a long title. Here it comes. No access. The need for improved language assistance services for limited English proficient Asian tenants of NYCHA. But it's a message that is plain. Right now, for limited English proficient tenants, it's tough to get what you need from NYCHA. Here to tell us more are representatives of the two organizations who created the report. Shahana Hanif is the public housing organizer for CAV, Organizing Asian Communities. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
And we also are pleased to welcome Erin Markman. She is the Research and Policy Coordinator for the Community Development Project, which is part of the Urban Justice Center. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
Yeah, let's explore all these aspects of the problem and the reports. I want to start with the fact that this is clearly becoming a bigger problem. What were some of the early indicators that this is a growing epidemic? Erin?
Sure. So I think Shahana can talk more about the organizing side of this. I think this was a problem that we really started to investigate together as a result of what CAV was seeing on the ground through their organizing efforts and really encountering increasing numbers of tenants who were facing language access issues, which really led us to partner and investigate that issue through this research.
Shahana, what were some of do you want to speak to that?
Sure,
please.
Definitely. So our organizing efforts began early in 2013 when we were knocking on doors as part of our broad voter engagement work. And while door knocking, we were also very curious to know and understand Asian residents' experiences around living in public housing, language access issues, repair issues. And so a lot of the residents were facing and continue to face a lot of repair issues and related to language access, not having adequate language access services. Mm-hmm. And so around that time, we held a Know Your Rights training where more than 50 residents showed up, and so we partnered with the Community Development Project at the Urban Justice Center and created a survey to better assess and better amplify the narratives that were not necessarily heard, and also just bring to light the reality of language access issues within NYCHA.
To define the terms and the parameters of your study, a second ago, Greg was talking about Urdu speakers, people of Bengali. Like, how did you define Asian? Because you know, most people think, okay, it's Chinese.
Absolutely. So a part of the reason we stuck with Mandarin speakers, Cantonese speakers, Bangla, and Korean was due to our organizational capacity and our volunteer base. And that which was limited. And so those were the primary languages that we focused on, but that's not to say that we didn't knock on doors who were Urdu speaking or who were Indo-Caribbean, which also fall under the Asian category. And so in the report, we do go into some summaries of the different communities we came across, and continue and hope that this project will sort of help us to do broader work with Asian ethnicities that are not included in this report, including Vietnamese, Tibetan, and Urdu-speaking Pakistanis, Indian. And so because of our limited capacity, we stuck to that demographic.
Erin, where was the need then? Looking at that spectrum, which sort of language had presented the biggest barrier?
We really saw the issues across the board. So like Shahana said, the surveys were administered primarily in Mandarin, Cantonese, Bangla, and Korean, and really across those languages. And we know through other conversations across other languages, there's very pervasive gaps in services. So tenants really across the board are having trouble accessing interpreters when they need to talk with NYCHA about housing matters, accessing translated written documents, accessing the repair system in languages they can speak. And these barriers really prohibit people from
understanding and getting done crucial things they need to do in their housing. And what we found is that people's family and friends are really required to step in to fill some of the gaps left in those services, which puts people in challenging positions. People, kids have to come out of school to interpret for parents. And it's really, the responsibility of the housing authority to be providing those services.
Yeah, I mean, and the blanket issue here is why are there those barriers? I mean, not just for the 20,000 Asians that live in NYCHA housing, but the expansive population overall of Asians in New York City. Why all the barriers? Can you guys speak to that at all?
Well, I think what we saw through our research is that, the language barriers for folks living in NYCHA, I think, occur for a number of reasons. One is that the staffing isn't sufficient. So there's only 6 staff interpreter translators for the entire system. So there's over 400,000 people who live in these developments.
6 people, that's not even 1% of 1% of people who have to deal with 400,000 folks.
Yeah, and not all those 400,000 people need those services, but large numbers do.
That's still too much.
Right, and they only speak limited languages. So only 2 of them speak both Mandarin and Cantonese, and those are the only languages on the staff. And then there's these employee volunteer pool, which supplements that.
Yeah, we're looking at a chart right now, sort of a flow chart of the language access structure there at NYCHA.
Exactly. So those...
it looks complicated.
Yeah. Those 220 employee volunteers are people who have other full-time jobs at NYCHA and are tapped to assist with these services, which is admirable that they're willing to do that, but really not a desirable way to get people these services. So that is part of what contributes to the barriers. And then I think there are also some problems on the systems end. So NYCHA doesn't have a way to record and maintain a record of the languages people speak. So if a tenant goes to NYCHA and says, I need language access services in Bangla, that's not then recorded so that later they could, later they could provide that person a translation or interpretation at a meeting.
Or even develop some sense of critical mass to say, we've got one request, we've got another request, and it just goes into a hole.
Exactly.
So where are we going to begin to fix this? I mean, what are some of the recommendations of the report?
So going back to what Erin was saying about the census or not having an adequate recording of which residents are living in NYCHA, along with their languages spoken, which ethnicity. So we're calling for NYCHA to conduct a better assessment through census and track who's living in NYCHA. That would be like first and foremost.
And isn't it kind of remarkable that there's not a better record of who's living in NYCHA?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
I just continue.
And just for our own organizing purposes, we had to rely on the Voter Access Network to pull lists according to voter district. And those lists were according to race and not ethnicity. And so we manually went down the line and we're just like, this person might be Korean, this person is Bengali, or this person is Chinese, and then door knocked, but then came across other residents, which is where we built our base and relied on tenant leaders.
I imagine that NYCHA has a slightly larger budget than your combined organizations. So if you guys are capable of doing this, how much would it cost to scale this to NYCHA to make sure that a record is at least kept of folks who need translation services?
I'm not sure we could speak exactly to the cost on that side, but NYCHA already interfaces with all of their tenants, right? So they have annual review processes. They have people talking to them about rent. They already have these tenants coming to them about language access issues. So I think our feeling is that this type of assessment could get built into existing points of interface with tenants, and then systems that they already have could be adapted to do this tracking better. So I don't think it means reinventing their systems or creating an entirely new set of programming. I think it really could be folded into existing work. And I think that's true of other recommendations in the report as well. So for example, the number you would call to request repairs for NYCHA. If we called right now, we'd hear a prompt in English, which says for English, press 1. We'd then hear a prompt in Spanish, which says for Spanish, press 2. And then the third and final prompt we'd hear is in English, which would say for all others, stay on the line. So something like adapting a system like that to include other language prompts isn't a massive overhaul.
Who's doing a good job at this citywide? Like, if I call NYCHA, whatever. If I call 311, would that make a difference? Because I know I've heard them go through a litany of
They
languages.
have more expanded prompts, yes.
So is this a workaround? Like, if you're watching right now and you're translating this magically into Chinese, could you call 311 and get service?
Not for these services. So these are systems that are exclusive to NYCHA that aren't accessible. So you might be able to call, there's a new complaint line that 311 has, so you could call to make a complaint about services at NYCHA, but you couldn't call to request an repair in your apartment, which is basically not being able to communicate with your landlord and super.
So it's a big problem in the Asian community. I mean, to that end of what you're speaking about, how can the report be used to help other groups with some of the same problems, if at all?
Well, just going back to some of the recommendations, we're hoping that NYCHA allocates better resources to improve their tenant association, for instance, which exists in every development, to make the community at large feel included within the public housing development. And so we worked closely with the Queensbridge Houses Tenant Association, the Tenant Association President, April Simpson, and that's a great resource for residents. But many of the Asian residents are unaware or feel isolated due to their lack of English skills or due to the lack of documents in their languages. We also hope that other organizations will partner with NYCHA or will work alongside NYCHA, for instance, CAV, and help organize the community better for the broader language movement, for also housing preservation, for also just inclusive community.
So speaking to that, in the last 90 seconds, I wanted to talk about a bigger thing of like this perception that like Asian Americans are sort of an exceptional minority, where it's like they're in the best schools, they have money, and they don't need, like, working against that perception to get the Asian community better representation so they're not hiding and lacking services.
Can you reframe the question?
Well, I'm saying people think that, oh, if
Right.
you're Asian, you can't get into Harvard. We got too many of them. They're doing better than other minorities. They didn't sneak across the border. Donald Trump's not vilifying them. So because of this perception that they're like the superior sort of minority, they're being underserved by the city. They don't even speak the same language if they need them in public housing. So it's sort of dismantling this perception so that folks can get services. Or am I completely wrong? Greg, back to you.
No, I see what you're saying. I mean, like, how much of the perception of Asian Americans plays into this problem that's going on as detailed in the report?
I think in my opinion, the perception about Asian Americans is that we fit into the model minority myth that Asians are the doctors, the engineers.
Right.
However, in our report, we really exemplify the reality that many Asian Americans are living in poverty or living in public housing. That was one of the myths that we debunked, that there's no Asian in public housing, or that there are hubs of low-income Asian immigrants living throughout NYCHA or just living within New York that are low income and need of resources. And so whatever perception exists, I mean, it doesn't mean that they're not living in poverty and that they need resources.
Well, can you tell us about your organizations before we have to let you go and how people can get involved?
Sure. So you can find the Community Development Project through our website, which is cdp.urbanjustice.org. And our mission is really to partner with community organizing groups like CAV to support their work and boost their capacity in a number of different ways through legal support as well as through research and policy work, which is what I do.
How can we link up with CAV?
Sure. So you can visit our website. It's cav.org, and CAV has 3 A's. Yes, and we're always in need of volunteers and folks who speak Mandarin, Cantonese, Bangla, and Korean to join our team of outreach. And we're a Pan-Asian nonprofit organization. We work to build grassroots community power among poor and low-income Asian immigrant communities, and we hope to build a broader movement of racial, gender, and economic equality.
Well, we hope to see you back at BRIC House October 22nd when we have our town hall meeting on immigration here in New York.
Great.
Would love to see you and your folks back.
Sure, thank you.
And please come back to the show.
Great.
Great job, guys.
Thanks
Thanks
so
for your
much.
great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.